I'm attracted to stories, and having my Opa tell stories, I can recall him telling stories of his childhood. And he would only share them more as we got older, because that's when we could understand them better. During 1943, him and his family were in the Ukraine, and it was during World War II, and they had to leave. And they eventually made it to Holland, and in Holland is where they met Peter Dick, who was working with MCC, and that's where they eventually were able to come to Canada. They're on the boat coming to Canada, and they're nearing Canada, and his mom started crying and just said, finally someone wants us. And I think that just probably sums up their past 4 years of not knowing where to go, but yet the whole time just being led by God and just relying on that. When you read the story or you hear stories, they just give. There's just so much compassion for everyone else who is suffering alongside with them. But in him sharing those stories, he was sharing this idea that you give whether or not you have what you would think is enough.
To pass down the stories and what made it relevant to us is very, very important, to pass it down to our children and hopefully down to their children and their friends and people, everyone we come in contact with, because I mean the circle needs to get bigger than just our families. It becomes more difficult with each generation, I believe, because the impact of the first generation it's hard to pass that on to future generations, which means we just have to work a little harder doing it. And we just need to introduce them to many of the things that we heard about, but now we must read about rather than hear about.
As I've gotten older, I've recognized more the value and the significance that MCC has had in my life in terms of my heritage, and the work they're doing today is extremely significant and is very relevant to my heritage and my grandfather being a refugee and the way they support refugees. And so MCC is just an organization that I am 100% behind. The legacy that my grandparents and their generation have left is remarkable and sacrificial. Like, the writing on the wall is just God's story. And when I recognize that and acknowledge that, my giving is just that much more genuine. I think the act of giving comes from watching those people around you give. Is when you see the people around you giving, you yourself recognizes that as being something that you do. Because I have been given so much. There are needs in the world. I don't want to sit around and do nothing. I wish I would have had even more interest when my Opa was alive, because I would love to hear more stories. And I think it's extremely important for my grandparents' generation to be telling stories to their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren, because they need to be heard and they're important. And it's God's story that you're sharing. It's a story of faith that needs to continue.